The first thing that used to come to your mind was the name of the doctor, not the name of the hospital.
The clinician himself or herself is a brand, and on top of that, the enterprise also needs to create its powerful brand. Hopefully, the two together will create a volcano. This industry actually finds it very difficult to change. Employee-employer relationship, they fundamentally don't want to get into those structures because the consulting arrangements give them a feeling that they are.
Vishal Bali has spent more than 30 years in Indian healthcare. He has built Asia Healthcare Holdings into a 75-city platform by handing clinicians ownership. On Build to Share, he tells Satish how you give a doctor a real stake in the business when they refuse to be your employee.
Is compensation an issue?
The FCD structures are very common for the consultants. They will be parallel to ESOP structures that will come into the clinical world. Some of it is still happening, phantom stocks are being given.
Is there any magic solution to the nursing problem? Much, Vishal. You are somebody I know does not need any introduction, one of the doyens of the healthcare industry. And what fascinates me is over the last few years, the breadth of stuff that you've done. You've started as a management trainee, got into CEO of a global company, then been an entrepreneur in a home care, that too pioneering something that did not, exist, in an investor. And now you're an operator investor trying to do, more things. I don't know what else is left, but it's amazing. I would like to start with one thing that I've kind of noticed, and I'm trying to draw a similarity, especially with what you're doing now, a bunch of specific single specialty hospitals and trying to aggregate them on a platform. Now, typically, when we look at any tech-oriented startups or entrepreneurs, usually the origins are either in academia or they come from the industry. And when they come from the industry, largely, especially software, if I take, or even hardware as in semiconductors, usually you come out of a Google, a Salesforce, an Intel, an NVIDIA, and you would have found a problem that the incumbent was not addressing. Then you come out and specialize on that piece. So is it kind of right to say that this single specialty hospital is similar to that, where do most founders of single specialty clinics comes from a large integrated healthcare system? Is that how it works, or what are the origins of?
Yeah, so firstly, it's great to be here with you, and thank you for the invite. As you said rightly, for the tech industry, the single specialty sector coming out of the large format multi-specialty institution, the origin of that is definitely, first it was the clinicians who thought that there was probably an opportunity to go into the single specialty format because they have lived the multi-specialty life and they know what works and what does not work well for them in that kind of a format. And so if you take a look at most of the single specialty enterprises that are there, it is always a clinician in that specialty who has sort of driven it and driven it to scale then. And then I think from there on, the entire cycle of capitalization, growth, push for multiple geographies that has come up. But that's truly what the origin of the single specialty healthcare ecosystem is. It has come from the large format multi-specialty organizations. What it is trying to solve for, and the reason why it was also created, was changing consumer preferences, largely return on capital employed. Third, it was largely also focused around around scalability.
Okay.
Because if you take a look at, the last 35, 40 years of corporate healthcare in India, and if you look at the largest of the players, even today they are talking about 10,000 beds. Even today they are talking about 15 or 16 cities around the country. But if you look at the single specialty formats, they've already sort of gone to 30, 40, 50 cities in the country.
Wow. Okay. So the scale of the single specialty is actually more than the scale of the multi-specialty.
The footprint-wise, yes, it is.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Yes. So our own ecosystem of AHH today operates in 75 cities in the country. So between Motherhood, Nova, and AINU. And that has all happened over 10 years. So, whereas the large format enterprises have been there for 30, 40 years.
So what about the economics here? Is economics a driver as well for the clinician to step out of this multi-specialty and build these things? Do they believe that they would have a larger share of the business as such?
I think it is less to do with their income levels, or it is less to do with their compensation structures. It is less to do with the volumes that they have been doing. I think it's more to do around the fact that they believe that when they create single specialty enterprises, these enterprises are very focused to their clinical acumen.
Correct.
So therefore, the footfalls, the patient reverence that they get in the single specialty format is far higher. And also, what happens in a small single specialty format, the competitive dynamics, even amongst the clinicians, are very different. You go into a multi-specialty institution, there'll be 4 teams in that specialty, right? There'll be 4 senior consultants and their teams below them. But in a single specialty format, there'll be maximum 2 to 3 teams, or 2 teams sometimes. So I think that also creates an opportunity for them to do a lot more clinical work, and also a lot more footfalls coming to them.
So, one thing that you said about the scale is really interesting here, right? So now multi-speciality clinics, I'm assuming, have a easier time attracting talent compared to single specialty clinics.
Yes.
Right? Now, how does this scale happen? If I have to go to a tier 2 town, because obviously we have the X number of larger cities, and
Correct.
then you have to get into, especially in India, you have to touch the tier 2 and tier 3 towns, right? So where does the talent come from, and what is the talent magnet there?
So I think a lot of clinical talent in the country, if you look at over the years, a lot of clinical talent has migrated from the smaller cities to the bigger cities.
Ones.
Like all of us did, right?
Correct.
For education, we went to bigger cities. We then probably stayed on there. We got into jobs there, and we sort of just became citizens of those cities, right? But even in the clinical ecosystem, the same thing is true. Now when, clinicians are seeing many of the tier 2 cities emerge, and they are part of, say, an ecosystem in the bigger city where they are number 3 or number 4, when they know that they go back to their own city, they can very quickly become a number 1 or number 2.
Right.
So that reverse migration of clinical talent has also begun to happen, which was not there for the longest period of time. Because now they believe that these markets are evolving fairly quickly. The consumers in those markets earlier, they were also migrating to the bigger cities for their healthcare work. Now they prefer to stay back in their own home cities. And so therefore, if these clinicians go back there, their scale of practice can go much faster.
Interesting. So, the lifestyle changes that comes when you move from a small town to a bigger city. Now you're saying they're happy to go back, to that kind of lifestyle, especially if you move from tier 1 to tier 2. I'm sure the difference is not much, but if you move from tier 1 to tier 3, it begins to, widen.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's as far as the top talent goes. But what about the rest of the, clinical staff itself in these, places, because now I think the medical colleges are spread across the country. You probably have tier 2 towns, tier 3 towns also having medical colleges. Now, are these like good places to hire for these guys? Is that the model that you will go get these from the local colleges, build some training program, and that's how the talent gets built up in these places?
I think the source of talent for the clinical side is obviously all the medical colleges. And earlier, if you see, most of our clinical talent was housed in AIIMS, it was housed in PGI, it was housed in the larger, either the municipal corporation medical college ecosystem in Maharashtra or, down south in Tamil Nadu and, Kerala. But I think with the number of new medical colleges that have come up in the country, and they have all come up in these tier 2 cities and sometimes even the tier 3 cities. So that's an incubation ground for new talent. But more importantly, I think what is also happening is that people in the bigger cities are also now realizing that the kind of lifestyle for which they came to the bigger cities, that lifestyle is now getting disrupted a lot.
Right.
This is a classic city. If you're going to be spending 2 hours going from point A to point B, you'd rather be in Indore and be within the city,
right,
which offers you a good balance of work and your personal life, and move around the city in 25, 30, 40 minutes. And the other thing which is changing is the entire civic infrastructure in these cities is changing now. So better schools for their kids to go to, better work opportunities for their spouses. So I think more and more as we begin to see, and more importantly, if you see the growth trajectory in terms of GDP some of the tier 2 cities, not tier 3 as yet, are growing much faster than the tier 1 cities.
Correct.
So the opportunity size is definitely going to be to their advantage.
Okay. Interesting. So I'll come back to the form of employment itself in healthcare, right? I mean, normally, typically in any other form, except maybe law,
Yeah.
you have an employer-employee relationship and so on.
Yeah.
So with this healthcare system, that's not quite the same, right? So most of them are consultants. Some of them, they are working mostly in a larger hospital, but then they practice outside or they have their own, clinics and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, do you see that at any point in time changing, and does the same mechanism carry over to this, single specialty hospital as well, or do you see more corporatization where they're actually employed, they're in-house, and services are rendered, totally from inside, and all the economics of the clinicians are also connected to the enterprises economics, so to speak.
Correct.
Do you see that shift happening?
So that the shift will not happen from them being consultants to employees. But the shift is happening primarily from a visiting model to a full-time model. And that's really the changes that are happening in the entire clinical ecosystem and the entire healthcare sector with the way that clinicians are engaging with healthcare providers. So earlier, they would be all visiting doctors. There'll be one anchor clinician, and then there'll be, say, 20 visiting clinicians. Slowly, steadily, that entire concept is changing. So even in a consulting format, 2 or 3 or 6 clinicians will say, I'm going to be full-time with you, right? So while I continue to be a consultant in the contractual structure, but I am committed 100% to you.
So this is a full-time and exclusive arrangement.
Full-time and exclusive arrangement.
Okay.
And so therefore, the full-time and exclusive arrangement then calls for that they are at a certain retainership, which is calculated in parallel to their fee-for-service model.
Right.
And then, by virtue of them being full-time, the footfalls that are generated by the institution then also go to them.
Okay.
Right. And that is the reason why they would like to be in a full-time format. This is now true for the whole sector, whether on the multi-specialty side or on the single specialty side. In the single specialty side, the number of clinicians that you need on a full-time basis in a box is not 25 and 30. In a single specialty, the number of clinicians in that specialty that you need inside the box would be about 3, 4, 5, 6. Right?
Wow. Okay.
But in a large format multi-specialty box, you would probably need 60 consultants on a full-time basis, because now every department, every clinical domain requires an anchor clinician who is a full-timer. So there is a change which is happening in this ecosystem.
And this is whether the hospital chain is private or listed, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
The mechanism.
The mechanism is completely the same. In fact, there are other models which are now beginning to come up in terms of, because like everything else, in the entire professional world, there are quasi-ESOP structures which are coming up for them. There are FCD structures which are coming for them, so that they also feel rewarded, that it's not just about the volume and value of work that they do on a monthly basis, but by them being committed with the enterprise for the next couple of years, they also have a bump up like typically the ESOP structure gives.
Correct. No, I was going to get there into the compensation structure, right? Now the whole thing of this visiting in multiple hospitals, that being your fundamental economic driver to a full-time but still contractual, is already a step up in terms of commitment, right?
Yeah.
Now, if I'm going to be committed full-time, then I would naturally expect, or rather be okay with some of my compensation connected to the value of the larger enterprise.
Yeah.
Now, in India at least, unless you are an employee, you cannot be given ESOPs. So you've got to figure some structures out. But do you ever think it's going to go to a model where, people will say, okay, it's better off being an employee because there are a lot of other things that, get kind of covered, especially for the younger doctors. I'm not too sure, people who have come out, let's say a doctor who's like 10 years experience, would their perspective of how they would be, how they would like to be compensated changing, or this is an industry that just follows the grand old rules, and as things change, everybody else changes.
So this industry actually finds it very difficult to change. And and that's basically because of, from the time that clinicians get educated and the environments in which they are, larger than life personas, life-saving, and so therefore almost godly in
Right.
terms of the,
Correct.
in terms of the stature.
Correct.
So things in this industry change very slowly. I think what happens also is that the employee-employer relationship, they fundamentally don't want to get into those structures because the consulting arrangements give them a feeling that they are still consultants, right? So while they are in a format which is a full-time format, but their relationship with the institution is that of a consultant.
But what drives that? I mean, because if I can build an economic incentive that it makes sense for you to, be part of the organization for a longer time, and also given what you just mentioned, normally, moment you talk about a very specific ailment or a specialty,
Yeah.
the first thing that used to come to your mind was the name of the doctor,
Correct.
not the name of the hospital,
Correct,
right?
correct.
But now if the shift is that I'm going to be associated with one hospital,
Yeah.
and also if the brand of the clinician is larger than the brand of the clinic, as a business owner of the clinic, I would want the clinician to be tied as much as possible, right? So don't you see that economic driver at least pushing in a direction where
See, what is happening is that the economic drivers are actually all there. They are not in that same format, but the economic drivers are all sitting there. Like, for example, because the FCD structures are very common for
Correct.
the consultants, right?
Correct.
Because, as you rightly said, the ESOP structure is more for employees, but for the clinicians who are consultants, there are other monetization structures that are there. So they are very economical in their mindset. They understand all of these ecosystems now, which have been created around the employee subgroups. But, and I think in some way, they have also forced the system to think like that in their formats too, which is in the consulting format, they still want certain degree of monetization to come back to them. So I think we will not see the clinical ecosystem coming under the employer-employee format because of the way that they think about their relationship with the institution. They think of that as, even on a full-time basis, they think that we are as much, a part of your ecosystem as your employees are. The only difference is that I am under this umbrella of a consultant, whereas your employees are under the umbrella of being an employee.
oh, but I would love to own 2% of the company that I work for, right? So, for me, not just the pride of being a part owner of the company. Let's assume I'm not an entrepreneur clinician, but I've grown in my, practice and I've got to some point. And now I'm hot commodity for hiring, right? Whether it is a Fortis or an Apollo or any of the multi-format specialists looks for me to maybe just run a department and so on. The business owner risk that I see, and then every time we hear that a multi-speciality hospital has expanded a certain practice, you will see a bunch of people who would have moved from
Another
so it's
one.
not just the main clinician, right? Everybody moves.
Yeah,
Now, as
yeah.
a business owner, I do want to provide mechanism to protect that and also reward you for staying. One is the immediate instant gratification of you bring a certain business or we close a certain amount of business by the end of the year, we share that. But largely, if you're going to build a brand, I want to take on the largest in the space, or eventually I want to list at some point in time, this, because in the startup world, this ownership culture is very strong.
Correct.
People want, to be part owners, they want to be there when the company lists and so on.
Yeah.
Now, how many years do you think we should wait for something like this to get into this?
I think what is going to happen is that there will be parallel to ESOP structures that will come into this world, into the clinical world. Some of it is still happening, phantom stocks are being given. And again, I think the retainership models itself, the retainerships are far ahead today compared to, some of the practices that are there. So if I value somebody's practice today, they would be on a retainership, which is far ahead of the value that they are actually bringing in every month. So that in itself is incentive, right?
Yeah, but that's
it's not a locked incentive for the next 5 years.
So, in your experience, have you seen anybody who's come in and tell you that reduce my retainer but increase my, do you see that happening at all?
Not yet. It's actually the other way around. Increase my retainer plus give me something else too. So
Wow.
yeah, because I think also it's coming from the fact that this sector is also getting competitive. You can see around us,
Correct.
the number of healthcare chains which are there. And gone are the days where, and I have lived that world, right? I've been in this space for now 30 odd years. And I have lived in that world where clinicians would be in one enterprise and one hospital for almost 15 to 20 years. I still have great friends who are sitting in the same hospitals which I ran many, many years back. But I think the mindset of the new generation of clinicians is also pretty different, right? They don't mind moving from one institution to the other in quick succession. And sometimes you really find that every 6 months, there is a kind of a round robin which is going on, which is not really great. I don't really think that that's the right thing to do, because over a period of time, when you are in one institution, your patient pool also continues to be with you in that ecosystem. The moment you keep moving around, at some point in time, the patient pool actually disappears. And there comes a time when you're looking at a completely new patient pool for your practice. But I think given that where the demand-supply gap in healthcare today is, and given the demand-supply gap on the clinical talent, I think that we will probably see the evolution of the models around compensation structures which will come. But the way that I see it, it will all remain under the consulting threshold, right? And under that ecosystem. And I think we will probably, all of us together, will have to innovate a lot more in terms of how do we still create stickiness, how do we still create long-term relationship. The other thing also is that unlike in an enterprise creation, what happens in healthcare is that it is also by that institution and by that individual hospital, because your work is actually first and engraved inside that one box, and that then contributes to the entire company. So most of the time, the work that the clinicians do is very targeted towards that one hospital or that one single specialty unit. And that is another reason that many times they don't really think of themselves at an enterprise level. They think of themselves as their department, their clinical ecosystem of their department inside that one hospital. So we then need to create unit economics and avenues to sort of make more compensation on the back of the unit economics that one hospital makes. And I think that's the difference between that enterprise upside and the upside of, if I do very well in this one hospital, how much can I get more out of what the earnings of this particular hospital is.
That's interesting, because if I were to look at the listed company financial data, right? These companies are doing what, 30, 35 PE, almost 5 to 10 times revenue. And it looks like a very healthy business where I would want some way of getting my hands on the upside.
Yeah.
So the business numbers look great, but looks like the constituents inside, have
Think
a different,
differently.
thought process in mind.
Yeah. And, also the thing is that at the end of the day, because their visibility is also to that institution where they go and practice every day, their life revolves around that institution. So while they see the upside, and they see the upside of, then many times they will say, oh, I'm doing so well, but your other consultant in another hospital is not doing that well. Why should I, the employees don't think like that. In an ESOP program, you never think like that. But under the clinical ecosystem, they start thinking that, it's my practice in my unit, and that governs everything on the economic side for me.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting thought, because the same parallel you again see in larger tech enterprises, right? Intel has thousands of products, different division. One division does well, another division doesn't. Somebody you're incubating, so is loss making for 3 years. So, but what ties them together is the single vision of one enterprise.
Yeah,
and if you look at a combined, consolidated financials, it's a good growing,
Correct.
business. Interesting. So let's come to the way HH is building all of this, platform. Now, most of the platforms, if not all, is an acquired entity, right? So HH did not incubate anything, but you started acquiring single specialty hospitals at different points in scale, and then bought all the operational rigor and few things. Now, when you go and acquire this, obviously it's 100% owned by a clinician or a set of clinicians. Now you're taking majority ownership and so on. Now, typically, how do these founders, treat this acquisition? Are they happy to continue? Do they continue, by default, where their economic incentive is met, their clinical practice is running, their brand gets built out, but they're still part of this platform, so to speak? Or do you see them typically, stay for 2-3 years after acquisition, then go back and, do something else?
No, so I think the way that we structure each one of these institutions that we have sort of built, some were early stage, some were mid stage. We have never done any enterprise which has been very, very mature. So the reason why the clinicians also participate with us or let us take a majority in their business is basically because they feel that they have sort of reached a plateau as far as all the work that they could do. And now they need a catalyst to come in, and that catalyst may not just be capital, but that catalyst is also the management teams and the power of the process, right, and the management process, which can fire their enterprise a lot more. So I prefer that they always should remain at a 30-35%. In two of our enterprises, over a period of time, that 35% has come down to 10-12%.
Well, that's still very healthy.
That is still very healthy, and they see exponential value creation from there, right? Because when they see us coming in and they see us, then taking the entire management thrust on ourselves, we put in our CEOs, we put in the management teams, and then the enterprise begins to grow a lot more. Their share actually is also accruing a lot more additional value than what at the value at which they sort of sold the enterprise to us. And till now, at least, and touch wood, we have not had a situation where any clinician or any clinician founder has exhibited that they would rather do something else.
Wow.
And even though they are a very small shareholder in that particular enterprise, because now, they are believing in the AHH story. And they are believing in the fact that, by merging with the overall enterprise of AHH, their upside is even more. Because all our enterprises are doing and maturing very well on the unit economics front. So, potentially when we go IPO, over the next 1 to 2 years, everybody gets a massive upside. And so I think it's a function of what we demonstrate inside these companies. If we just totter around, don't have a very good vision of where we are going, if we put mediocre talent to work, and the enterprises don't really change in their structure and change in their market positioning, then the fault is ours and not theirs. So I think that really works. That equation works very well. And many of them just want to continue. So even if they are small shareholders, they just want to continue with the enterprise.
So do they kind of get some periodic liquidity through this, process? Or, they just get diluted because you're bringing the capital and thereby owning a majority of the company?
So we do create a liquidity box, and where they can, at intervals of time, they can take some liquidity off, because I think that's also good, because they see that visibility that that there is a structure under which they will, and then obviously everybody waits for that final leg to cross, which is the one that everybody keeps looking for. Because that's also a promise. That's also the AHH promise, because we are still private.
Correct.
And so everybody then feels that, ultimately when the enterprise lists, their upside is going to be exponential. So I think that is all working very well. And this is all through a SHA structure, right? So they feel comfortable that there will be timelines to some liquidity coming back to them.
So does it stop at the founders, promoters of these businesses, or does it go a few levels down, include other key people in the business?
It does. So we generally like to see shareholding. So there is a cap table into which we come. And at that time, we also like other people from within that company to also participate in the cap table in some way, right? So either the founders have distributed, the shares at an initial time, or at the time of the transaction, they want to distribute some shares into the other team members who've been there with them for quite some time. And that I find to be a very healthy situation. When founders do that, they are also giving an indication to their team members that they believe in this new story, that their enterprise, while it is going through a majority transaction in the hands of another enterprise, but they believe in the future growth potential of their enterprise. And till now, everything has been good. And all the founders and their teams have done very well in the AHH ecosystem.
Fantastic. So how does the integration take place? Now, there is obviously a mother and child business, there is the oncology business, there is a nephrology business and so on, right? When you bring them under the same umbrella, I've heard you say this before that, the operating stack comes from you guys, to make sure that there is some rigor. But generally, culture of the company would have been set by those guys. The culture of nephrology guys may be very different from the culture of this. Are there any challenges? Do they need to integrate at all, or they still independently continue to operate their businesses and the nuts and bolts of their own cultures are preserved? Or does it make sense to bring them under some common AHH culture?
So I think the AHH culture is driven by the CEOs that we put into each one of these businesses, because they are they carry that culture with them.
And so, and these CEOs could be different than the founders who came in?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So most often than not, the founders give up their operating roles, which is the administration roles, because they also realize that for them to double hat as a clinician and also as a manager, at some point in time, there is one activity which is getting compromised.
Especially when you're scaling,
Particularly when you're scaling, right? And if you see, even in the large format multi-specialty institutions, wherever the clinical founders were there, at a certain stage, they have brought in management to come and help them and support their growth. So we do that right from day one. So if I invest behind a company tomorrow, I'm very, very clear in terms of who's going to be the CEO of that company. And so while there may be a transition for some time, but that is, again, it's a given in that structure, that there will be a CEO who will come and take ownership of the P&L of the company. So that works well, because then the CEO carries the culture. And most often than not, because the CEO potentially could have been an AHH employee earlier, he then knows that what is it that is required and the rigor that is required to be a CEO of another AHH company. Second, I think what is more important is that because we are operating first and investing later in our head, because we think of ourselves as operators and not as pure investors, we have sort of led this operating life for a very long period of time. And the entire team that I have at AHH has been more or less with me now for almost close to 20 years.
Wow.
From my days in Wockhardt to Fortis to now at AHH. So our wavelength, our bandwidth in terms of understanding of each other and what is required to be done is also very, very clear. So that just helps, and that's also motivating me a lot more every time to just go and take another leap and bring another company into AHH, because I know that my DNA of the AHH enterprise is pretty well rooted now.
So one of the interesting things I've read is the consumer, or, and again, when it comes to healthcare, sometimes these words tend to mean, very different things. I don't want to call it customer acquisition, but when I am looking at a specific thing, like for a mother and child, right? Now, I can market the product independently to a consumer. Right? Now, when I start to do that, now as an operator, I'm tending to look at saying, okay, where can I find the best marketer?
Correct.
Is he in an FMCG company? Is he in a tech company? Because I do want this product to be marketed to a consumer. And thereby I will build my marketing and sales force, which probably not necessarily, comes from a typical multi-speciality, healthcare system, where you are not really going and trying to acquire customers. You're just trying to talk about what you do and so on and so forth. But if I look at, mother care, look at ophthalmologists. I think you can go and do this typical marketing sales stuff. So when you look at the single specialty hospital, how much of an importance is given to this kind of talent, which would probably come and say, okay, I know this is a consumer style enterprise, and obviously it's a healthcare company, but the nature of care and nature of issue itself is such that you could possibly treat it as a consumer product.
Correct. So also finishing the previous thought line, which you said, that do these companies continue to operate with, in silos, and what binds them all together? So in order to give each one of the clinicians and each one of these enterprises the opportunity to just continue to grow in their clinical domain, these companies will always continue to be at the front end. They will continue their own path and their own trajectory of growth. Asian Institute of Nephrology and Urology, which is our Uronephro chain, will have a very different trajectory of growth. Motherhood, which is our mother and child hospital, will have a very different trajectory of growth. Nova IVF, which is our IVF chain, has had a exponential trajectory of growth. We are in 70 cities with that business. So every business will have its own trajectory of growth. All that we will bring together at some point in time is the entire shareholding structure collapsing into one. But at the front end, each one of these enterprises will continue to run and create their own history. So coming to the question that you asked, I think in today's world of healthcare, and with the entire consumer thought process that is taking it over, the branding side, which is the marketing stroke branding side, is a given across all specialties. Because until and unless you begin to really go out there in terms of connect with the consumer with a very powerful brand proposition, which is the clinician included, right? Because the clinician himself or herself is a brand too.
Correct.
And on top of that, the enterprise also needs to create its powerful brand. And hopefully the two together will create a volcano. So I think that's where the function of branding and marketing comes in, which is more around the fact that each one of these specialties, while some will be so clinical that they will not, you can't go and talk to a consumer and say, you come and do a neurosurgery with me, right?
Correct.
Because that is not
Correct.
what it is, because that's a referred science. Whereas in a business like IVF, right, where there are thousands and thousands and millions of consumers or millions of couples in the country who are looking to a technology with which their parenthood journey can be achieved. That's a very consumer-oriented specialty. Likewise, on the mother and child side, obstetrics is a choice that I'm making. The hospital I go to, the clinician I go to is a choice that I make as a consumer.
So would you recruit a FMCG marketer to be a marketing guy for any of these businesses?
Of course, and I have done that.
Fabulous.
In fact, I have done that. So for our Nova business, it has always been powered by an FMCG.
Yeah, because one of the things because we talked about how difficult it is to move the healthcare,
Correct.
ecosystem. From the ecosystem, right? Now, generally, whenever we have seen disruption like this, people from other industries enter, they bring a different thought, and that begins to kind of percolate. Because if you look at marketing folks, for example, great marketing folks can market anything. I mean, you are a consumer marketer and a business marketer. So it's good that these guys potentially can get in and probably learn the nature of the business and start to market.
In fact, if I take a look at all my key functions, and I've been a big proponent of the fact that in every sector, you sometimes need to bring somebody from outside of that sector, because that change process, the thought process, after some time actually stagnates a bit, right? And therefore, the moment you bring in a fresh perspective, the thoughts change. That enterprise begins to change. It begins to evolve very, very differently. So there is nothing wrong in bringing somebody with an automobile thought process or sector into healthcare, right? So across our various functions, in fact, and my CFO now comes from the edtech world, right? My IT guy has...
CFOs are very flexible.
Correct, because they can do anything.
Yeah.
Likewise, the marketing guys, they are from FMCG. They've been in healthcare for some time, but their core DNA is FMCG. The branding guys mainly are coming from the FMCG world. The B2B sales teams are coming from the insurance world. So I think we've sort of made sure that we continuously evolve the entire ecosystem of talent that we have, so that we bring in new perspectives from other sectors. And I think that way HH is also better, because we continuously have this new DNA which is coming in, and it is helping us evolve even faster.
And these roles could, I'm assuming that they have no issues in becoming employees.
Not at all.
All of them are employees.
Everybody is an employee.
Fantastic.
As far as all the functions are concerned, as far as all the enterprises, the CEOs, their -1, -2, -3s, everybody is an employee. There is no consultant approach there at all.
So coming to new startups in healthcare, we normally don't see too many startups in healthcare, right? Especially when it comes to care. You'll see medtech and you'll see devices and some stuff. So, and again, normally if you look at other sectors, it'll always be a domain expert and the business guy somehow come together and start.
Yeah.
Do you kind of see any shift towards that? Do you see in the future healthcare startups coming out where you probably have a clinician who's your domain expert,
Yeah.
but there's a business guy from day one.
Correct.
It's not a clinician as an entrepreneur trying to build a business.
Yeah.
But a doctor and maybe a business guy or an engineer teaming up and starting a company.
I think it will happen slow and steady, Shani, because the way that I see the ecosystem now, most of the healthcare provider groups, they started with the clinicians, because that was the catalyst. The clinicians were the catalyst for, they felt that they wanted to create a chain, right? So Dr. Devi Shetty is a classic example, Dr. Trehan. So if you take a look at the entire healthcare sector, in fact, behind every large chain, there is a clinician.
Correct.
Who started it and who was the founder. I think the evolution that is now taking place is more and more from the perspective of the professional managers are beginning to think about, and those who are within the sector too, that there is disruption to be created, right? And so there are one or two startups which have also begun from that perspective. And I hope that there is more that happens. In fact, I did one personally with my home healthcare business. That was a Nightingale's business.
I'll come to that.
And but there is that, that mindset is beginning to change. That where executives who have been in these enterprises for a long time and have lived the life of healthcare, they basically think that there is a better way to do it. So I'm sure that as life goes on, so while it was all for a longest period of time, and we will continue to see that more. I think it'll be tech-enabled healthcare rather than pure vanilla healthcare. So we will see that marriage of the technology guys coming along with the healthcare guys and creating a very different kind of an ecosystem. But even if you take a look at some of the step-down care formats today, they are not being driven by clinicians. So if you take a look at Subitas, you take a look at Sukino, you look at Kites, they're not clinicians. They are all executives, right, who have come from different parts and different sectors and have then found that there is an opportunity in healthcare.
Correct. Fabulous. I mean, there's so much to talk to you, but I guess we are running out of time. But I'll end with this Nightingale story. I can't tell you how many people have blessed you, for doing Nightingale, right? Now, what we hear is when it comes to nursing staff, both attrition, hiring, everything is an issue, right? So, is there any magic solution to the nursing problem?
So that I think that's a self-created problem for the country. So for the longest time, we had enough and more of nursing colleges, and these nursing colleges were largely sitting in the trust structures. And then, there were some rulings which came out saying that, these trust structures cannot continue. And so therefore, many of the nursing colleges shut down. We unfortunately have given very little thought as a country to both on the medical side and the paramedical side in terms of that to treat and manage 1.4 billion people. You need that entire medical and paramedical workforce to provide care. Real estate is not an issue. We can start building beds anywhere. But the biggest issue that we all face today is the ancillary staff. And that ancillary staff, for the longest period of time, there was one state which was giving us most of the nurses, and that was the state of Kerala. And now there are 3 or 4 other states. But I think till the time the number of nursing colleges in the country don't grow exponentially, that ecosystem does not change and becomes more aspirational, right? Because the nurses also feel that, and that's the reason why they will work here for a year and then they all fly off to other countries.
Is compensation an issue?
Compensation is one issue. The other issue is they all feel that in other countries, their talent is respected a lot more. And because, when they are on the floor, they are never treated equal. So I think that also needs to change. So There is a big issue around the nursing talent. Nursing attrition today in most of the institutions is 30 to 40%, right? And so you're literally churning your staff every 1.5 years, and which is not a healthy trend, because it becomes disruptive to the care process. It becomes disruptive to, sort of create new levels of patient engagement. So we have a lot of work to do on that front.
Well, on that note, I hope there's some changes, and people like you will come, I'm sure, invent something to improve both the nursing part of it and corporatization from a perspective of treating this as an enterprise, even though I know you did say it's complicated and it is slow, but hopefully it gets to a point we will begin to see this as a larger enterprise style where it doesn't remain the realms of a consultant and hospital short-term relationship. On that note, let's end this fabulous conversation.
Thank you very much.